Welcome to our deep dive into the world of the Chinese pheasant. You've given us some really interesting excerpts about this bird, and we're excited to kind of dig in and see what we can learn. So get ready for vibrant colors, captivating mating rituals, and maybe even a few surprises along the way.
It's amazing to me what's so interesting about the Chinese pheasant is that it really sits at this intersection of human history, ecology, and even culture. We'll be looking at its remarkable adaptability. We'll look at its symbolism, and we'll even talk about some of the conservation challenges it faces today.
So let's just start with like the basics. I mean, where do these birds come from originally? I mean, their name kind of gives it away, right?
Well, yes and no. So while we call them Chinese pheasants, their native range actually goes beyond just China. It includes parts of East Asia as well, but China is definitely like their heartland.
And from there, they've spread out, haven't they? They've really kind of made themselves at home all over the globe. The excerpts mention them being found everywhere from farmlands to forest edges.
Yeah, and their adaptability is a key part of their success story. They're not too picky about their habitat. And that's really allowed them to thrive in this, amazing variety of environments. And their journey across continents, it's really a mix of accidental releases and some that were purposefully introduced for hunting. It's made them a truly global citizen.
That makes me think about the excerpt that you had highlighted, the one about their introduction to North America.
Yeah.
Um, if I remember correctly, it wasn't all, smooth sailing for them at first, right?
No, you're absolutely right. There were definitely some bumps along the road. Adapting to a new environment with different predators, different competitors, it's not easy. But their resilience and adaptability, it's quite impressive. They were able to establish themselves and thrive in North America.
I'm sure the resilient has a lot to do with their mating rituals,
Hmm.
which you marked as a must
Yes.
discuss, and the visuals. I mean, the male pheasant is just dazzling with that vibrant plumage. Can you just kind of paint us a picture?
Well, imagine a bird with a shimmering, like metallic golden brown body, a head of just striking greenish blue, and then this bright red wattle that just pops. And then, of course, the tail. I mean, we're talking long, flowing, barred feathers that can actually be longer than half their body length.
Wow.
It's like they're, dressed for a red carpet event.
Yeah, it's no wonder that the excerpts mentioned how popular they are in art. But then you have the females who are practically invisible compared to that. That mottled brown camouflage that they have must be perfect for nesting and raising their chicks. Why is there such a difference between the male and the female?
It's a great question, and it's a perfect example of what we call sexual dimorphism, which is when males and females of the same species have very different physical characteristics, and it's all driven by evolution. You see those vibrant colors and that impressive tail. That's the male's way of attracting a mate. It's showcasing their health and their genetic fitness.
Mm.
The females, on the other hand, well, they need to blend in. They need to protect themselves and their offspring from predators.
Oh, okay, I see. So it's like this evolutionary balancing act. They're trying to stand out to attract a mate, but they can't stand out so much that they become an easy target. And that brings us to their courtship displays. The excerpts describe them as quite the spectacle.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing. Picture a clearing in the forest, and you have multiple male pheasants, strutting their stuff, fanning their tails, puffing out their chests, calling out to a nearby female. They're trying to win her over. It's like a combination of a dance-off and a beauty contest all in one.
What kind of challenges do these males face when they're trying to attract a mate? Do they ever get into fights with each other?
Oh, the competition can be pretty fierce. And yes, things can get, physical. They might chase each other, peck at each other, even get into some wing-to-wing combat. But it's all part of the process, right? Ensuring that the strongest and healthiest males pass on their genes. And of course, this is all happening while they're trying to avoid predators. So that just adds another whole layer of complexity to it.
Yeah. Wow, it really makes you appreciate all of the pressure that these birds are under, even when they're doing something like attracting a mate. But it's not all just about looks and elaborate dances, is it? I mean, they have a pretty important job to do in the ecosystem as well.
You're absolutely right. While the excerpts focused a lot on their visual appeal, Chinese pheasants play this really important role in maintaining the balance of their ecosystem. They're omnivores, which means they eat both plants and animals.
So I imagine they help keep the insect populations under control.
Exactly. They're like little pest control experts. And their foraging habits actually help with seed dispersal, which contributes to the diversity of plants in their habitats. So they're like little gardeners, spreading seeds as they go.
It's incredible, A bird that we might consider common can have such a big impact on the environment. It's starting to make sense to me why they hold such cultural significance, especially in China.
That's a great point, and it's a perfect segue to the next part of our deep dive. In China, the pheasant is so much more than just a bird. It's a symbol that's deeply woven into their art, their literature, even their philosophy.
I'm really intrigued by their connection to Confucian values, which I know one of the excerpts touched on. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Confucianism places a really high value on virtues like benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trustworthiness. And the pheasant, with its graceful movements and its dignified bearing, became a symbol of those qualities. They were often depicted in art and literature as embodiments of courage, honor, even leadership.
So they kind of transcend their physical form, don't they? They embody these abstract ideals. I'm really starting to understand why they're so revered in Chinese culture.
Yeah. And it's not just Confucianism. The pheasant's vibrant plumage also led to associations with beauty, prosperity, and good fortune. They were often seen as auspicious symbols, representing all things positive.
It's incredible to think about how a single species can hold such diverse and profound meaning across different cultures and time periods. It really
Yeah,
speaks volumes about our complex relationship with the natural world, doesn't it?
absolutely. And speaking of different cultures, we have to talk about the introduction of the Chinese pheasant to other parts of the world because it brought about a whole new set of cultural associations and practices. But we'll save that fascinating part of the story for our next segment.
Welcome back to our deep dive.
Hmm.
Last time we were talking about how the Chinese pheasant's journey across the globe led to some interesting cultural shifts. I'm kind of curious to learn more about their impact in those new environments, especially when it comes to like hunting and conservation. Those are some pretty contrasting viewpoints in the excerpts that you shared.
Yeah, that's a really great point. The introduction of the Chinese pheasant to places like Europe and North America created a really interesting dynamic. On one hand, they became this popular game bird. People sought after them for challenging hunts and their meat, which is, supposed to be quite flavorful. But on the other hand, their presence actually spurred conservation efforts. So it's like, people wanted to make sure that the populations remained healthy.
So it's like they sparked a debate, right?
Yeah.
Like game bird versus a species in need of protection. How did that play out in terms of like, actual conservation effort?
Well, it led to some really, really innovative approaches. One of the key strategies, and you highlighted this in your excerpts, is habitat restoration. So it's all about creating and maintaining environments that give the pheasants the resources they need to thrive, like, restoring native grasslands, planting hedgerows, and really importantly, controlling invasive plant species.
So it's about giving them back, like the kind of landscapes that they naturally, evolved in. But I imagine that's a lot easier said than done, right?
It definitely takes a lot of effort, yeah. But the results can be incredibly rewarding. One example that comes to mind is this project in the American Midwest where they focused on restoring prairie habitats. And by reintroducing native plants and controlling those invasive species, they were able to create this really thriving environment, not just for the pheasants, but for all sorts of grassland species.
Oh, wow. So it's like a win-win for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
except maybe the invasive species.
Right.
I remember reading about a similar project in Europe where they used hedgerows to create corridors for the pheasants, so they can move between these fragmented habitats.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how these small-scale changes can have such a big impact on the bigger picture.
Yeah. And it's not just about creating the right habitat. It's about managing it in a way that benefits the pheasants.
Yeah.
Things like controlled burns to stimulate new growth,
Yeah.
carefully timed mowing to create favorable nesting areas. So it's like you're fine-tuning the ecosystem, and not just for the pheasants, for the whole community of organisms that live in that habitat.
So it's like a constant balancing act. Now, another excerpt that you marked was about captive breeding programs. How do those fit into the conservation picture?
Well, captive breeding programs are really crucial, especially in areas where pheasant numbers have gone down because of habitat loss or other pressures. They kind of act as a safety net for the species, so even if things get tough in the wild, we can ensure that there's a healthy population.
So it's kind of like a backup plan for genetic diversity. I'm imagining these programs involve like, carefully breeding the pheasants in controlled environments and then releasing them back into suitable habitats.
Exactly. And it's really something to see those captive bred birds taking flight in the wild for the first time. It's a testament to all the hard work and dedication of the people who are working to give these birds a fighting chance. But captive breeding, it's just one piece of the puzzle. We can't forget about those introduced predators we talked about earlier.
right? Like the foxes and feral cats. And it's tough, isn't it? Because they're just doing what's natural for them. But their presence can have a really big impact on the pheasant populations. It must be a challenge to find solutions that kind of benefit everyone.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's really a delicate balancing act. Trying to manage the predator populations while also protecting the pheasants and all those other native species. Some methods involve like trapping and removing predators, while others focus on modifying the habitat to reduce their impact.
Oh, okay. So there's not like a one-size-fits-all solution. It sounds like each location kind of needs a slightly different approach, a different strategy. I'm starting to see how complex conservation can be. It's not just about the species you're trying to protect, but it's about the whole ecosystem it's part of.
Absolutely. It's a truly interconnected web. And speaking of connections, I'm reminded of an interesting question that you posed in your notes. Could the introduction of Chinese pheasants have any unintended consequences? Like, for the native bird species?
Yeah, I think that it came up in one of the articles that I shared with you. It mentioned the possibility of them competing for resources.
Yeah, and that's a valid concern. While they've integrated really successfully into a lot of new environments, there's always the potential for unintended consequences when you introduce a non-native species. They could outcompete the native birds for food or nesting sites or other essential resources.
This is like they're upsetting the ecological balance. I'm realizing that conservation is not just about protecting individual species. It's more about preserving the relationships within the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, you've really grasped the key concept, and it highlights how important ongoing research and monitoring are, and adaptive management. We need to constantly evaluate the impact of what we're doing and adjust our strategies accordingly.
It sounds like a never-ending process, but a necessary one, right?
Yeah.
Especially with so much at stake.
Yeah.
I'm curious, beyond habitat restoration, captive breeding, and predator management, are there other ways that people are working to help the Chinese pheasant?
One really crucial aspect, and one that often gets overlooked, is public education and awareness. The more people know about the pheasant, its role in the ecosystem, and the challenges that it's facing, the more likely they are to support conservation
So
efforts.
it's about empowering people, right?
Yeah.
To become stewards of the environment. What kind of things can individuals do to make a difference?
Well, it can be as simple as supporting conservation organizations that are, actively working to protect the pheasants and their habitats, or, choosing products from companies that prioritize sustainable practices, even spreading awareness about the importance of biodiversity among, your friends and family. I mean, all of that can have a ripple effect.
It's inspiring to see so many different approaches being taken to protect the Chinese pheasant, from these large-scale habitat restoration projects to individual actions that promote awareness.
Yeah. Yeah, it really shows the power of collective action.
Yeah.
When we combine our knowledge and our resources and our passion, we can really make a difference for conservation, even for a, seemingly common species like the Chinese pheasant.
It's all about recognizing that we're all interconnected. The fate of one species is ultimately tied to the fate of all living things, isn't it? Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I wanted to touch on something that really stood out to me in those excerpts that you shared. The cultural significance of the Chinese pheasant, particularly in their native China. We briefly talked about their connection to Confucian values, but I'm really interested in delving a little bit deeper into their role in art and literature and symbolism.
That's a perfect transition to the final part of our deep dive. We've explored their journey across continents, their ecological roles, and the challenges that they're facing. But the Chinese pheasant's more than just this biological entity, right? It's a symbol that's woven into the very fabric of human culture, and that's a story that's worth telling.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the world of the Chinese pheasant. We've explored their fascinating biology, their global journey, and the kind of delicate balance between hunting and conservation. But now I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and delve into their profound cultural significance, especially in their native China. I'm really intrigued by the excerpts that you highlighted about their portrayal in art and literature.
Yeah, it's really a rich and fascinating tapestry woven over centuries. Imagine, you're scrolling through these ancient Chinese paintings and you come across these stunning depictions.